All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's MicroStrat chat, Leadership Through COVID-19, the Human Resource and Human Capital Perspective. Just a couple housekeeping tips before I introduce our facilitator and leadership executives. We will be recording this session. We are encouraging all attendees to ask any questions that they may have, as this is an open forum for discussion. When you're not speaking, we're going to ask that you keep yourself on mute to reduce background noise for others. Any questions you have that you're not comfortable asking out loud, feel free to type them in the Q&A section, and we'll make sure to get passed along to the facilitator. Again, we just want to thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us, especially considering it is a holiday for some of you. It is now my pleasure to introduce your facilitator and your panelists for today. Facilitating the session will be Lisa Cavanaugh. She's an executive here at MicroStrategies. The panelists we have joining us today are Lisa Calico, Senior VP and Chief Human Capital Management Officer at WCG Clinical. Lisa is a business leader and Chief Human Resource Officer who has nearly 3 decades of global business experience split between line and support functions. With 20 years as a results-driven HR leader and executive coach with Fortune 500 companies, she has a broad range of experience helping hospitality, pharmaceuticals, drug development, and life sciences companies design and deploy HR strategies to accomplish business objectives. Our other panelist is Denise DiPiano, a strategic human resources leader. Denise is a visionary HR practitioner and catalyst with extensive experience in integrating HR functional disciplines and behavioral competencies in transformations that result in human dignity and achieve business outcomes to become and remain agile. Lisa, why don't I go ahead and I'm going to turn this over to you so that you can introduce yourself and we can kick this off.
Thank you so much, Kelly. As Kelly said, my name is Lisa Cavanaugh. I'm a leader here at MicroStrategies, and today we are joined by Lisa and Denise, and I'm very excited to have both of you here with us today. I want to say good afternoon to everyone that has joined us as well. We appreciate you spending the time with us this afternoon, and Lisa and Denise, we appreciate your openness to have the conversation with us today. I do want to emphasize that this is a conversation, so it is okay to interrupt each other. We know that each one of you have tremendous wisdom to share with us, so we want to make sure we can get those nuggets of value injected as we need to. Looking very forward to the conversation today. As you know, it's been a few weeks since we've all hit this crisis. We've had a chance to digest the initial shock of the crisis and recognize what our new reality is. And what I'd love to hear from the both of you is, what is on your mind in terms of where we are today with respect to that crisis versus where we were several weeks ago from an HR perspective? Lisa, if you wouldn't mind, if I can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everybody for being here today. I would say that first and foremost, we're surviving, right? Who would have thought even just a month ago that the world would literally just pivot? Doesn't even seem like a pivot, seems like an off-on switch. So I think for me, that's the first thing, is what do we need to be doing to survive and thrive, meaning stay healthy, keep our families healthy, stay safe, and then obviously be there also for our respective organizations. It's kind of like adjusting to what I call a suspended state. I hear a lot of folks talking about how this is the new normal. This isn't the new normal. We are awaiting the new normal to reveal itself. But while we operate in this suspended state, we're still responsible to the people of our organizations, to our families, to each other. And so just learning how to work in a suspended state where you don't have a lot of answers. The answers that you have are subject to change based on the day and the source. And I think that's one of the challenges that we in the HR profession have had, because people usually are coming to us for answers and for guidance. And I don't think that any type of BCP or educational program could have prepared us for a challenge of this magnitude on so many fronts.
I'll go next. So thank you for allowing me, giving me the opportunity to share my experiences and insights. And good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I hope everyone is healthy and safe, and your families are that way as well, and remain so. So it's can be scary times out there, but I think we can all, do our part to help with the situation. So I think for me, I work with a lot of different organizations and companies. Some had were better equipped and to handle this situation, meaning that they already had a work from home program and had guidelines around that, and others did not. So the ones that did not, it was really this quick fire drill to put down some kind of guidelines, again, not a necessarily policy, but just of what are the do's and don'ts, and how are we going to communicate with our associates or the employees? How are we going to make sure that we can get to to everyone? For some companies, not every employee has an email or a text. So how are we getting to them? Do we have does that company have an HR portal? Do they have an intranet? So communication was really important, and how is that going to happen? Making sure that we have a way to contact all of the associates. Do we have all of their contact information to make sure that we can get to them? So I think that those were some of the quick things that we had to first and foremost deal with, and what is that infrastructure? For those that are working from home that have never worked from home before, doing a quick training session for those, and just kind of really helping them and working with the associates. So I think that has lessened now, because the ones that can work from home have been working from home. But if there was an essential, some companies that I work with are considered essential, and how are we handling those that are coming into the building? So what are we doing to make sure that we're social distancing? If it's the entire accounts payable department that needs to come in, or the customer service, and they're not doing it remotely, how are we handling that? So I think that those were some of the things to work through. And now that's, I wouldn't want to say necessarily stabilized, but has lessened that kind of panic. I think it's going on to the next stage.
Right. Lisa, you had mentioned something very thoughtful with respects to, there's nothing that really could have prepared us for what we have today, and the fact that organizations look to HR for this guidance. What would you say has been the toughest piece for both of you as HR leaders in giving guidance for what is different about this crisis than anything you've necessarily navigated in the past, with respect to how are you giving that guidance to your organizations?
I would say, Lisa, for me personally, and what I've heard from even my team and a lot of colleagues, it's the speed and the magnitude at which information is unfolding. From the early ripples beneath the surface that things were going to change pretty dramatically, and trying to predict when and where, and as Denise talked about, mobilizing and getting workforces literally overnight to make a shift and work in ways that some of them have never worked before was pretty significant. I think the other thing is assimilating the information that's coming at us in terms of, for example, the stimulus package, the CARES Act, the FFCRA, and folks wanting to understand, what does this mean? What do I need to be doing? In the absence of not always having clear guidance, for example, from the government. And so people are looking to you to, number one, help understand what it is, unpack it, untangle it, and then make it relevant for the organization. And you're just doing this at lightning speed. I mean, every day there's new guidance coming out, even the whole safety protocol, to mask or not to mask, changes. And so I think we're normally balancing several plates at one time in the function. Here we've been balancing on all fingers, all toes, heads and our backs, and whatever other parts of the body are available, and just trying to also project some sense of calm and some sense of reassurance in light of not knowing what that looks like, I think, the overwhelming sense of anxiety that many are feeling, even the folks who usually, don't get rattled by things, people are looking for HR for ways to cope and coping with new work situations. I talk to a lot of folks who they're not only trying to do work from home, they're also now parent teaching. I was joking with a colleague the other day. He said, my gosh, thank God my daughter is in second grade and I'm doing second grade math. can't imagine doing algebra and trigonometry. So there's just a lot of dimensions going on the human front, and the HR teams, we have practice and we have skills in these areas, but using them all at once when the quicksand is, shifting beneath our feet constantly, that's been a big challenge. And again, we're learning by doing, like many people are in these circumstances.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, Lisa. I think the other things that we're trying to really kind of deal with are, so one of my clients has someone that has domestic violence in their life, and work was a safe haven for that person. And so that safe haven is no longer there. And how are we really helping that person? Are we doing daily check-ins with that person? How are we handling people that we know might have depression or suicidal tendencies? And so, how are we handling that? And that comes from that leadership capability. And it, not only from the leadership capability, when we say that, I think it's really, it's what was so important before is magnified now. Building relationships, the trust that an employee has with their manager or with the HR department, that they can have that conversation with. So I think that those types of things where you didn't really have to think about it as much because that person was in front of you and you were able to see how that person was doing, it's very, very difficult now. So, it's just really making sure that you're having those daily check-ins, not just with them, but with the team. Are you having 5 minutes? It's a 5-minute check-in. How is everyone doing today? Is there something that's on someone's mind? Maybe a family member is sick. So I think it's really just having those kinds of those touch bases that are so important and so critical. I know that when I've been speaking with the people that I work with in the companies that I help to support, I kind of really have dispelled this what is the new normal or new normals, plural, because there could be more than one new normal, to a never normal. And part of what I have always done in my consulting is really getting people to go through a transformation and becoming agile. And doing that is really becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that that's going to be really important. And I think that's a skill that people are going to, especially the leadership, is going to have to really embrace in order to thrive and not be a victim of the COVID-19 circumstance or another black swan that could be coming round the bend.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in here because we actually got a question from the audience, and I think it's a pretty good one. They're asking, so much to untangle and in constant flux, how does HR really keep it all together? And then in parentheses, stay calm.
I can tell you what we've been trying to do on our team, frankly, divide and conquer. There's so much information coming from so many sources. I mean, you just think about the ones we're hearing about every day, the CDC, the World Health Organization, the Department of Labor. And for one person to be able to just receive, digest, untangle, and put into perspective day in and day out, we still have day jobs. Our companies are still running, and we still have the normal things that are going on. So on our team, we've been trying to assimilate. We speak every other day. We were speaking every day for the first 2 weeks. We now touch base every other day. But folks are constantly sending around information and really just trying to distill it, give the cliff notes. Here's something that's getting a lot of buzz. This is relevant for us because of X, or it's not relevant. Kind of tuck it away. But for example, there's certain things that just don't apply to folks in our industry. And so dividing and conquering, and also checking in with your network. I have found I have a personal network that I belong to has just been super helpful in terms of just for example, a communication to employees. If there's been an employee who's contracted COVID-19, do you tell the rest of the employee population they worked with, or don't you? And if you do, how do you do that? And so getting samples of how other companies have done it, what words they've chosen to use, how they distribute, has been really helpful. So I would say divide and conquer and using your network. We are all working on pretty much exactly the same things. And so there's a lot to be gleaned out there. You don't have to recreate that wheel, and you have to manage with the resources you have. We're people too. And that's the other thing. How do you try to take care of yourself as an HR function? Make it as fun as you can. And usually people look to us for those types of ideas, and we're a pretty creative bunch. So those are some of the things that our team has done to try. I'm not saying we're doing it perfectly every day. We're all still quite overwhelmed, but we're getting used to it, and we're getting a rhythm of how we're dividing and conquering and pacing ourselves, because we're probably in this for a little bit of a longer haul.
The follow-on question that just came in as well, is there more on HR's shoulders with all of this?
From my perspective, yes. I think that, to Lisa's point, everyone's looking to HR for guidance, and not only just in terms of what the regs are and what policies are, but also just in terms of keeping morale up, and how are we working with those team members to make sure that they're getting what they need in order to still be productive. To Lisa's point, things still need to get done. There are companies that are hiring. So how are we onboarding those folks? How are we paying the employees? If payroll is done in-house, that's, who's going in to do it. If it's being outsourced, again, how is that being done? So, how are you paying the employees? Meaning, is it a daily, or have you switched and moved over to a daily way to pay? So there's, I think, there's definitely a lot more, but I think HR is uniquely qualified, quite honestly, to handle this, and to really take advantage of the situation, because for so long HR didn't have a seat at the table. And I think this just shows how important a really strong HR organization is for, or department is for the organization.
Yeah, I would add on, Denise, somebody said this to me, I can't remember who, I give them credit, but the 2008-2009 financial crisis largely featured CFOs at the forefront, figuring out creative ways to get through the financing challenges. I would say COVID-19, it's really the HR function that is out in front, certainly surrounded by all of the partner functions that are working together. But when you think about all of the things that are on the minds of employees now, they all center on things we touch every day: wellness, engagement, support, communication, working effectively, strong leadership, succession planning, critical positions. So in some ways, as hard as it's been, I'd rather not have a global pandemic be the burning platform, but in many ways, this pandemic has really pushed to the forefront some of the very things that we spend our life in pursuit of, and frankly, sometimes don't get the traction. And if you think even now about critical positions, think about the healthcare workers, think about delivery people, think about the grocery clerks stocking the shelves. I'll guarantee if you looked at the succession plans of some of those parent companies and you looked at critical position lists, you might not find drivers and stock clerks at the top. So this crisis has now forced a new conversation and forced people to become more conscious of things that perhaps maybe they didn't think of before, or they were taking for granted, that we've always been, saying, hey, we've got to think about succession. We've got to think about critical positions. If we have one person in-house and that's the only person who knows how to run the payroll, we better hope that person doesn't get COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So it's really opened up the door, I think, for more conversations. And obviously, once things evolve, to a more stable state, I think people will have a renewed appreciation for all of the work that we do every day in the function. It's our chance to, be in the forefront and lead the organization through not only the crisis, but how we stabilize and how we have a new type of workforce going forward. I think that is squarely in our space to take.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I think it's changing that mindset of organizations and of leaders, you know, CEOs, COOs, CTOs, whatever the C is, in terms of what is important. Succession planning, absolutely. You know, working from home. If you were so the naysayers, like, oh no, you can't do that because, you know, so and so is not going to get their work done. Well, it's being proven that people actually work harder when they are at home. I truly believe, and especially now, it's really difficult. To your point, Lisa, you have children that might be at home, or elderly parents that you're trying to keep safe and take care of as well. So I think it's really critical for us to bring all of those things that we've tried to get through in the past to really bring that to the forefront. And I think it's, again, I think it's worth noting that while all this is happening, every, you know, regular business is being conducted. So I think that's, it really is been a trying time, but certainly an opportunity to, again, really show how important HR is.
So those are great things you guys brought up. And to that point, I mean, it sounds a bit like, you know, HR as a result of COVID-19 is in a bit reinventing himself, but also pulling from things that have been central focus for HR, but maybe didn't get the prioritization that it needed. What do you think were things that you feel as though as part of HR you had, you were able to pull from to leverage, that were things that you've done to apply to COVID-19, and what areas do you feel as though maybe you really felt a bit flat-footed? So what did you pull from that you've leveraged in the past that kind of helped you kind of be, for lack of a word, prepared, if you could even say that word, in a crisis like this, versus what things do you feel as though there were gaps maybe in some of the things that HR was considering in the past? Lisa or Denise?
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to cut you off, Denise.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. I think a couple of things, Lisa. I mean, obviously, you know, when you get down to basics, it's having policies and guidelines and practices that form the foundation of, you know, how we work. And a lot of organizations, thankfully, have these in place. Some are a little bit more robust or advanced than others, but having at least some wireframe that folks can work off of and then evolve and adapt as appropriate. Really, you know, it's essential to have that, because otherwise you're just kind of starting from a place of kind of organized or unorganized chaos. I think the other thing is a lot of companies have continued to focus on managerial capability. And this is the time where great managers really need to show up even more. I heard a quote the other day, I think it's by Ernest Hemingway: the best way to learn to trust someone is to trust someone. And trust someone until they give you a reason not to. And that's really hard for a lot of managers, especially newer managers or middle managers who are used to being, you know, more closely working side by side with their employees. This situation forced it on everybody very quickly. And so then again, this is where HR teams, I think about talent management, training and development teams in particular, we've got content that can easily be brushed off or repurposed and delivered digitally, or even through webinars like this, to remind folks, this is why we train. This is why we have guidelines. This is why we have manager handbooks for situations, whether it's a pandemic or whether it's just a normal disciplinary situation. So I think a lot of that infrastructure that for some may not be the most sexy, glamorous part of the function, it's the backbone of how operating as a people leader and a workforce rests. And that's where people go. They look for practices and policies and philosophies to draw on. So I would say that's been a good jumping off point for a lot of folks to start with. I don't know, Denise, if you would add to that.
So I would add to that in terms of communication. I think that there's some companies that I work with, the president, CEO, have always been very reluctant in giving any kind of a communication. So it's really working with them to say, you know what, you have to get onto a video. You have to have a very calm resolve, be optimistic, no promises kind of message to employees. So I think communicate, over communicate is key. I think communication is really, for me, has come to that how important it was. I used to talk about that, and it sometimes fell on deaf ears, and now they understand that it is important. I think the other is just kind of that command and control, moving from that platform and moving to giving people more autonomy and more control to make decisions. I think decisions are being made faster, quicker, with the information that we have today, knowing that the information tomorrow may change. And so therefore our approach, our decisions are going to have to change. And people are starting to become comfortable with that and understand that that's what we need to do. So I think that from a decision making, we're no longer in that analysis paralysis kind of mentality and mode. And I think, again, from a leadership perspective, it's really, to Lisa's point, really gaining that trust. And we have no choice right now but to trust the people that we're working with, that they're going to be doing what we're asking them to do. I think just as a side note, kind of a little bit off topic, but when we're talking about remote working and what the expectations are, and I think, again, HR needs to be at that table to say, what are the expectations for people working remotely, which is mostly of the workforce now. And not only that, but really what the ones that are coming into the office, is that really what are we being fair and balanced and equitable in how we're dealing with everyone. So I think that those are some of the things that we need to also just be mindful of.
We had another question come in, so I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then Lisa, I'll push it back over to you. So is 2020 and COVID-19 the year and reason we reinvent HR because we can't avoid not doing so?
Oh, I would say, heck yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, but there's nothing like a good crisis to refocus folks' attention and give people new perspective to look at situations. And I absolutely think that, again, while I'd rather not have people dying and getting, gravely ill through a pandemic, make the case for a reinvented HR function, nonetheless, this is where we shine. The same thing I would say goes for even our medical professionals and delivery folks that you take for granted every day. I actually had a package show up about 2 hours ago, and chatted through the door with the gentleman and just said, "Stay safe. Thanks for all that you're doing." And it's before that, it's like, oh darn, my package isn't going to be here for 2 days instead of 1. So it's a chance to step back and look at the same set of circumstances with a much more informed perspective. I was thinking about this while I was running before. It's almost like this experience is helping us stamp our passport into a land that yet has not been discovered, but we're starting to inch toward it because we don't know what the quote new normal will look like. But every experience, every learning, every story you hear, every person's perspective kind of goes into that big blender in our brains. And then you start to broaden your perspective. And I think that is one of the things that the HR function is best at, is putting things into perspective. We are able to generally look at situations from the perspective of an employee, because we're all employees too. People leader, because many of us are people leaders. Customers of companies, we're customers of many of our own companies. So just having a multifaceted perspective, I think in itself is highly valuable. And now's the time that people are looking. We have an open invitation to share and lead. Why wouldn't we take it? So absolutely, Kelly, I think that this is our moment.
Yes, I agree with that. And again, I think a lot of the things that we've tried to highlight in the past that are important that we should have in place from HR functions, upper management is now looking at it and saying, "Yep, you're absolutely right. We need that." So I think that will this will really help us to change HR, and not just HR, by the way. I think HR is going to be the leader of the transformation, but I think it's hitting a lot of other functions within the organizations. I saw something on LinkedIn that said, who led your transformation? it was CEO, CTO, or COVID-19, and clearly it's COVID-19. But a lot of companies are now really going into a much more agile way of working and responding and being able to respond quick. And I think that there will also be a change from that mindset of what's the efficiency of something to add what's the resiliency of my supply chain. So yes, we're efficient in that, but if it's going to shut down at some point in time during a crisis, it's not very resilient. So I think that everything is going to be looked at through different lenses going forward.
And if I could circle back, Lisa, because I don't think I answered the other side of the question where you had asked about where perhaps we were caught short or flat-footed. I would go back to, again, do we really understand how our organizations work at the micro level and understanding the critical positions that are the cog in the wheel, and just making sure, I think we need to go back when we're in perhaps a little bit of a more settled state, is really revisiting. Do we understand how the business is really powered? What are those critical positions? What are the policies in place to support people, to give people the flexibility that they need? And I think that is just that's probably the area that jumps out the most at me, is kind of revisiting this whole piece of where we were caught short or perhaps just took things for granted.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if you guys can hear it. So another question I had was with respect, you guys had talked about the role of the senior leadership in the organization and how they were navigating with you guys and how they have to kind of lead the organization. How would you guys handle it, given the fact that HR is out in the forefront? How would you handle if that leadership organization kind of locked up? How would you kind of navigate with them and with the organization to help them if they were struggling with how to lead through this crisis?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, I think the first thing is just to understand why they're being, what's the stumbling block, what's the roadblock? Is it that just out of fear? Is it like, why are they reluctant or having a problem leading? So just really having conversations about that, and really just trying to kind of work through it with them, whether it's role playing or whether it's if you're doing some kind of communication that needs to get done. But I think it's really just trying to educate them as to why it's important for them to be out there and helping to lead along with HR and along with other people. So I think that it's really just having that conversation and really understanding what it is. Again, really, telling them that it's okay if you don't know all of the answers. Maybe they think that they have to have all of the answers. No one has all of the answers, especially in this environment. And what you say today, again, is going to change. It might change by the afternoon. We just don't know. So given the information that we have at this particular point in time, let's lead based upon that information. If we need to course correct, then we will course correct. But I think that those are some of the things. Again, having that calm and that resolute and really being very deliberate in some of the things that we're doing or saying might help those those leaders that are kind of locking up.
Lisa, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that question.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Can you hear me okay, Lisa? I know we were having some audio issues. I just didn't know if it was coming from my Wi-Fi. Is that better?
Lisa, I believe it is actually coming from your machine. Can you try and speak again one more time?
Yep. Just want to make sure. I haven't touched anything. I'm like always afraid to touch my computer when I'm projecting, but is this okay?
I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, but I can hear you okay. So I would say, go ahead.
Okay. I would echo what Denise said. I think in situations like these, folks are just looking for transparency. They're looking for leaders who are just going to level with them. I find in some cases it's very difficult for leaders to say those 3 words, I don't know. But folks are reassured by that because no one knows. You've got world leaders. You've got Anthony Fauci, who's probably the most educated person there is on this situation, saying we don't know. We'll learn through it together. And I think there's a comfort when folks hear that. Just being transparent, I think, is just always a great leadership trait. I don't think there's enough of it in this world, but in times like this, it just matters even so much more because people are just fragile and they just are looking for reassurance. And sometimes saying, I don't know, but here's the plan to get there is comfort in itself, especially coming from senior leaders.
Yeah. So question, we talked a lot about what's happened. If we had a chance, if you both had a chance to kind of set the reset switch and do it over again since all of this began, what would you do the same and what would you do differently? And the question I would ask you to hone in on in those, or responses I would ask you to hone in on is in your response, what do you think may have had an impact differently on the employees in the organization, possibly?
That's a good one.
Sorry, go ahead, please. No, please.
No, please. That'll give me a chance to take a drink of water. So.
Is my sound a little better, everybody?
Not yet, but we can make out what you're saying.
Okay, I can certainly dial in by phone while Denise is speaking, if that would be better.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that,
Okay.
Denise, if you can answer the question.
Okay. So I think it's an interesting question, and I think part of it is that hindsight, right, is it's great to be Monday quarterback. So I think it goes back to the original planning and putting things in place before something hits. Obviously, you never know what the black swan event is going to be, or even just a natural disaster. But I think again, having some of the policies and procedures in place, having that mindset of being able to adapt and change quickly is really critical. I think the infrastructure in terms of how you're going to have someone work from home is important to have. So maybe, if you knew obviously that this was going to be happening, you're going to deal with that. And it's really just all the policies around that. So as Lisa was talking about, it's really a business, holistically, what from the business. So you're going to deal with IT in terms of, the device or the infrastructure or the security. But then what are the, what's the policies around that in terms of if it's someone else's, if it's my own device, what are the implications to that? Do I get reimbursed? So I think that those are some of the other kind of learnings from that. I think going forward, it's really, again, having that connectivity to your workforce. If we're going back to work, whenever that might be, if it's before schools go back to school, how are we going to deal with that? There's a new poll out that 60% of employees do not feel comfortable going back to work without testing. And if we do go back to work, what are all the ramifications about that? Are we going to be able to make them wear masks? Are you going to be able to take temperatures? Is social, or I don't even like the word social distancing, I think physical distancing, if physical distancing is still in place, but you have an open work area, then how is that going to happen? Everyone doesn't have their own cube or their own office. How are we going to handle that? So I know I went off a little bit differently, but I think that just the preparedness of, one of the lessons that maybe we did learn was we weren't prepared. So while right now we're at again, I don't like to use the word stabilized, but it's working, right? Now we should be looking at what are we going to be doing short term when we go back into the office setting, and how is that going to be? Are you going to have visitors that are coming in the beginning or not? Are you going to have handshakes or not? You know, even if you do physical distancing within your workspace, there's a common restroom, there's a common lunchroom. So all of those things, I think, need to be starting to have those conversations now, so that, again, you're not caught in that panic mode and we just have to do something quickly. Those should be happening now. Again, I think that, you know, what are roles that are critical right now, and what are roles that are going to be critical maybe when you return to actual physical working area. You know, facilities is going to be paramount, whoever is cleaning your offices. So I think that there's certain things that we should be looking at that as each step, I think, might be a little bit differently, or different as we continue to go in. So I don't know, Lisa, if you have more to add to that.
Or just some thoughts
Yep.
on that, Lisa?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
you
Can you
sound
hear
great.
me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm on my mobile now.
Perfect. Thank you.
I apologize, while I was dialing in on mobile, I don't know if Denise touched on this, but I think one of the other things is just looking at things like policies and practices. For example, PTO time and sick pay. Prior to COVID-19, it was, I almost want to say, like a badge of honor. You know, people would drag themselves into work because they were so committed. And, you know, over the last couple of years, I'd say the tide started to turn. Like, if you're sick, go home, please. You're going to get everybody sick. And I think now we just need to make sure that it's, quote, okay for people to really be home when they're sick. Because now people have seen what can happen, you know, in the worst way, how quickly things will spread. But you have people who still can't afford to miss a day of work. They live paycheck to paycheck. And so how do you balance that by having maybe more progressive policies that cover vacation time or sick time or family leave that make it okay philosophically and financially for folks to do the right thing for themselves, but also the greater good. And I think, as Denise mentioned, some of these pleasantries or normalcies in the office that we just took for granted, I think everything needs to be looked at. I've even thought about, for example, you know, real estate footprint. You know, everybody talks about the cost of real estate and, you know, space crunches within companies. Well, does everybody need to be in the same building at the same time? We're proving right now you can still run a business, at least in our company. We can still run the business working in this remote configuration. And of course, it's not ideal. People miss the collaboration. I certainly miss it myself. But it may change just the way spaces are designed or company space needs that have financial impact. So it looks to me like everything is going to be on the table, just looked at through this new lens. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think some of these things are things that just, they hummed along until there was a reason to look at them. And here we are with COVID-19 is the reason to take a fresh look.
Yeah, and I think we also have to think about, you know, maybe everyone that's on this call is, you know, you have to look at exempt, non-exempt, and not only that, but you have to look at unions. So if you have a facility that has unions and bargaining agreements, you have to kind of understand what those are and make changes based upon that. So there's a lot to kind of digest and think about. But I do agree. I think that all policies need to be looked at and revamped. And you know, again, I think if you have a company that has maybe a large hourly base, how are you handling those associates and fairly to the people that are maybe going to be able to work from home and might have a little bit more flexibility? So I think, you know, you have to think about that. You know, are you thinking about hazard pay? Companies right now are thinking about hazard pay for some of their employees. Is that important? Is that relevant to your particular company, and what does that look like? So I think there's just always, to Lisa's point, there's always a lot to unpack within HR.
Ladies, we had, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
No, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
So we actually had 2 more questions come in that I would like to ask from the audience, and then we can push it back to the other Lisa C. I don't know if she had any closing questions. The first question that came in is, from HR's perspective, what do you think is needed in a leader, especially now?
I don't know that I would answer that differently in the world of COVID or non-COVID. There's certain things I think are just always, they're just kind of foundational traits for leaders. And transparency is one that always resonates. Folks just want to understand where they stand. They just want the truth and transparency about what's going on. We're all big boys and big girls. You know, we deal with good news and bad news situations all the time. And sometimes it's very difficult to stand up and deliver a tough message. And I think leaders that can do that with confidence and grace and empathy and respect will always be at the top of my list. I think leaders that are effective communicators, they can break things down and put things into very simple terms and help people understand why behind decisions are also it's a very valued trait. And I think leaders that operate integrity, who do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. There were a lot of companies that waited until they were told that they needed to move their workforces at home. And there were companies that did it way before and said, we feel that this is the right thing. We don't know what we're dealing with here. And let's just, out of an abundance of caution, let's empower and trust our people, and let's go, and let's flip the switch. And people have delivered. 95% of people are going to deliver. They're going to do the right thing. You'll always have the 5%, whether we're in an office or not. So I've just admired leaders that were willing to be bold and do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because they were told to do that. And again, I wouldn't answer that question any differently in a non-COVID situation.
Lisa Cavanaugh. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Kelly. I would say from my perspective, it is a little bit different, just because of what I do and helping companies go through a transformation and go from that command and control and kind of mindset into a much more open mindset and kind of freely giving up some of their authority and really making it about a team as opposed to one particular person. So I think from the work that I've done, there is a difference just in, yes, it's important to have the integrity, but I think a big piece of that is trusting your team and having that ability to trust and that openness to really kind of let others grow and you take a step back and let others have that authority to make decisions.
Great. Kelly, did you have a question?
I actually would like to hear your answer to that question. That from HR, or from your perspective, what do you think is needed in a leader, especially now? And then, if you want to move into closing after that, that'd be great.
Sure. I think that, I think both Lisa and Denise had very valid points in the fact that I think there are some foundational aspects of leadership that are just there, and that whether you're leading through a crisis like this or whether you're leading an organization through dramatic change and transformation, that there are certain qualities that they brought up that are essential. I think that the quality that does come out that certain leaders possess more strongly than others is really navigating that unknown with that calm that you mentioned. It's great to be able to bring people in and to also make sure you can instill that trust. Those are all valid things, like I said, that are foundational. But it is a very unique characteristic to navigate that unknown and being able to do it in a way that you can, everyone may not see the nervousness and the concern that you have, and you're able to take those steps and lead that team. And so I think that is something that will separate leaders in a time like this, because as you guys have mentioned, this is completely unknown and unprecedented for all of us. and it's taking each day at a time and leading their teams through that. So that's what I would say is something that leaders should learn from this event. So.
Lisa, I love that answer, and it's interesting because I was listening to a podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the particular podcast was about how anxiety is highly contagious, but so is calm.
Yes.
And the psychologist was talking about you don't necessarily need to match the emotion. So if the world is on fire around you, that leader or that person who can step in and just bring it down and be calm, that is just as contagious as the anxiety. So that's a great answer. I couldn't agree with you more. And I was very struck as I was listening to that podcast that, yeah, it's a very effective tactic in any situation, but particularly when the world is operating at such an intense, anxious level, more now than ever, let's spread the calm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So you guys have had some great, as I said in the beginning, great wisdom that you brought together. I think that really emphasizing that we are in a, I think you used the term suspended state when we kicked off, Lisa. It's not a new normal. It's this state of transition, and none of us know what the other side is going to really look like per se. I think we've taken a lot of learnings from what we had understood the world to be prior to this event, and now what we are experiencing, and what things, as you guys have talked about, had prepared us unknowingly maybe for navigating it, as well as what things would we maybe need to focus on differently. And I think the key piece that I'm hearing is really the role of HR in that, and ensuring that at the end of the day, organizations are, some of their people, and to lead them. And HR obviously is in that forefront to be able to help us in ensuring that as our organizations are navigating what we need to do to run our businesses, that we take that HR component and really give it the respect that it deserves, and ensuring that we are ready from that people side. So thank you for that. I want to just ask one more thing before we leave today. We've talked about, as I said, we've talked about a lot. And I just would ask this for a second, if you can each kind of, we've got another few minutes, actually, I think we're a little bit over, but if you could each just kind of take a deep breath, decompress for a second, and if each of you in just a minute, kind of, without overthinking it, just tell me what's running through your head from what we talked about today that you'd want to leave everyone with. So I'll ask Denise, we'll start with you.
I think what I would want to leave everyone with is that, one, to everyone's point, just stop and take a breath. I know information is coming quickly. It's ever changing. You don't know what's going to be coming down the road. I think everyone just stop, take a breath. I think try to do things that, safely, obviously, but have virtual happy hours, have, if you have employees at work that are celebrating birthdays or celebrating anniversaries, celebrate those. I think it's important, we're kind of in this mode of reaction of the negative right now. I think putting that optimism and celebrations in, I think, are really important. And I think just really looking at, from a business perspective, what we should be doing now, that's going to be a little bit different for every single person in business. But I think it's really important to understand and get ready for not just now, but if the experts are correct, that there's going to be a resurgence. And quite honestly, we've just seen that today in Asia, right? So in the Asian countries, there's a second wave that's happening. So even if we do go back to work in a physical location, how are we going to be prepared for that second wave? I think that we'll be better prepared, but there may be different challenges at that point in time. So I think it's really just, the preparedness of going forward and looking at all of those different things that we've kind of touched on and talked about today, and then just really leaning on HR and listening to HR and using them as a true business partner. HR is here to help and guide. We may not always have the answers, to Lisa's point, but we certainly will try to get those answers and give it to you as with the best information that we had at that particular point in time.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
I would say live to learn. Nothing has prepared us for this. It's probably a once in a generation type of phenomena. There's no playbook. Everybody's operating from, the same grounding. So live to learn. What are the lessons that you're learning and the observations you're making and the experiences you're having that will brighten and broaden your perspective for something different in the future? This is probably one of the most extreme circumstances that any one of us will ever live through. We'll get through it. Remember what helped you get through it. You'll need it again, whether it's large or small circumstances. So take it in. I keep notes to myself. I have observations that I just record that I think I can try to remember what this was like 5 years from now when we've got maybe something hopefully of a much smaller magnitude, but the same type of principles will apply. And so just go through it as an experience. It's a collective experience. We're all going through it together. I'm fascinated by how others around me react. My husband and I have dramatically different perspectives on this situation and how it shows. And it's just fascinating to look at it through someone else's eyes and say, wow, I'm looking at the same set of facts. And how do you see it that way? It's so interesting to me. So just use that as learning. Every day is learning. We'll get better, we'll get stronger, and we will get through it. Remember those lessons.
Lisa, we actually had a question come in for you. They said, shouldn't we always live to learn? Is COVID-19 a wake-up call?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if somebody I know asked that question, but I tell folks, my life is my laboratory. Every day is live to learn for me. And I'm at my happiest when I'm learning something new or something I just haven't thought about in a different way. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of it. There's even the smallest little things that you learn. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Tuck that away. And, some of these experiences, they're not the greatest. They're really hard. It's a really hard, trying time right now. But I read somewhere that experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, right? So everything counts in life for something. So yeah, I think that's great advice. COVID-19 is just, again, it's that reset button for a lot of folks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for your time. I very much appreciate the fact that you, again, were here to share your experiences and share your perspectives. It was really, I very much enjoyed the conversation with you for the past hour, and stay safe, please, and enjoy your weekend. Thank you.